Thank you for coming. Thank you even more for staying. What we're going to do is tell you a little bit about what we're going to do, and then we're going to play some music while I run through some pictures for you, and then I'll tell a little story, and then Andrew's going to sing a song, and then at after about 3/4 of an hour, we'll have an interval, and you can recharge your glasses. Now, in 1994, I think about September 1994, the Sporting Life carried a full-page article on the Newmarket racehorse trainer, Jeff Pearce. And he said in there that the person who got him going, gave him the impetus to get him started training, was Ruby Lanham. And Ruby Lanham was my mother. And people used to come and see her for a long way because they said she was a character. And I'm sure that you have plenty of characters out here. And she wasn't a character because she wore a red and white spotted handkerchief round her head, or because she had big gaps in her teeth, or because she jumped behind the door and played tricks on you. She used to tell people stories about her life. And if someone had had a bereavement, she could tell them something about how she lost her husband and things like that. And it was counselling for people. If they were under pressure and under stress, she could tell them about the hardships and the times and things like that. And it was all counselling for them, and it helped them. So she was a prolific storyteller, and before she died in the 1990s, I recorded a lot of her stories, and we're going to produce a book of these. So what we're going to do tonight is tell you some of those stories about the hardships in the agricultural depression against her love of horses, and in between, Andrew's going to sing a song. So first of all, we'll show you some pictures, and then we'll play you a little bit of music. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please don't clap too loud. It's a very old building. When the 1418 war broke out, they came around the farms and they commandeered the best horses. And the cream of England's horses went to the front. And off this 280 acres where Ruby farmed with her father, or she's young, well, she's a young, well, yes, a young girl then, she's born in 1905, they came and took 5 horses, and they had to beg them not to take the mares because they needed the mares to breed from. And they took these horses and they gave you good money for them. They gave you £40 a time, but it was a bad war for human beings, let alone for horses. And these poor old devils went to the front where they got strapped up to gun carriages and got flogged through the mud and sludder of Flanders fields, and it was carnage. And in 1915, the RSPCA, off their own bat, because of the carnage that was happening out there that they couldn't control, decided to have a day to appeal for people to anybody with any veterinary knowledge, would they go out there and help attend these horses. And but few of these horses ever came back to this country, even those that came back from the front to the docks. They hadn't got room for a horse, so they got left there and no doubt eaten by the Belgians. But after the war, some of these poor old devils, and there was 2.5 million horses went from this country over there, and less than 1 in 100 came back. But after the war, a few of these poor old devils came back into this country, and they came back into garrison towns like Colchester, where they got branded with a surplus mark, and then they were put in the auctions and sold. And there was an old horse dealer called Bill Pattle, who lived at White Street Green, Boxford, and he had 3 sons, Golden, Oti and Lazarus. And they said that they used to import horses from Ireland, and they used to go and drive them right from the coast when they came in from the boat, and drive them right across the land, selling them as they went. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. But they used to always be herding these horses round the roads, and they would go down to the horse sales, and they'd buy these horses and bring them back round the roads, and then drive them, because there wasn't much traffic about then, and drive them into the farmyards, and they would sell them as they went. And these boys would jump on their back, bareback, and say, "You want to buy a horse, Governor? You want to see this one?" And they'd show him to them. And this is a true story of one of these horses that came back from the 1418 war with the discharge mark on him. And old Bill Pattle brought these horses up into the farmyard, and the old man, Ruby's father, goes out to see what they've got. And he says to him, "What's up with that horse, Bill?" Because he seemed to have a funny thing by his eye, and he was lame. And old Bill Pattle said, "He's lost an eye in the Dardanelles, and in Boxford lost a shoe," he said, joking. So that's the chorus of this song. You can join in if you like. Andrew will sing it for you.
There's a story that me mother told, so I know it to be true. It's of a horse kind brave and bold, and I'll tell the tale to you. Discharged from the army with a brand upon his chest, he had seen the bloody battles, put the Kaiser to his rest. All kinds of contraptions he had been shackled to. He had lost an eye in the Dardanelles, and in Boxford lost a shoe. Now the Pattle boys would ride bareback as they travelled horses round. Came up the farm one frosty morn, a buyer to be found. From the garrison the old man said, 'twas where these horses came. So how much the one he did inquire, who's poor as a crow and lame. Not much, said old Bill Pattle, almost anything'll do. 'Cause he's lost an eye in the Dardanelles, and in Boxford lost a shoe. So we took him in and fed him up, dressed his feet and combed his mane. And with some love and kindness, he come back to life again. One day the old man rode him out, and he came back with a smile. He had galloped down to Kersey Bell, and back it's about 3 mile. When we asked what shall we call him, he just said Sparks'll do. 'Cause he's lost an eye in the Dardanelles, and in Boxford lost a shoe. He won at tender and hundreds when the old man rode him home. He jumped the creature mighty gap where none before had gone. He was the talk of the hunting field, and to prove I tell no lie, just read the sporting column, the East Anglian Daily Times. And every time he rode him out, there was always much ado, 'cause he'd lost an eye in the Dardanelles, and in Boxford lost a shoe. One night there was a dreadful fire, and the old man wept full sore. Old Sparks, he wouldn't come out his box, he was gone for evermore. But no skin we gave the huntsman, nor body for the hounds. He was laid to rest by Justice Wood, his happy hunting ground. We chose a spot so carefully, not anywhere would do, 'cause he'd lost an eye in the Dardanelles, and in Boxford lost a shoe. Yes, he'd lost an eye in the Dardanelles, and in Boxford lost a shoe.
Thank you, Andrew. Ruby was born on the 27th of December 1905 at Riverside House, Bewers, and her mother and father had met on a barge on the River Stour, and how they'd come to meet there was her mother was Emily Pettit, and she came from Stratford St Mary, and there were some people who had the mill by the name of Gifford, and they used to have barges on the River Stour then. The barges were actually scuttled during the 1418 war because they were scared of the Germans coming over, and they'd have easy transport up to important places like Sudbury. But anyhow, they used to tie a couple of barges together and put a piano on it. And the youngest son in this family was sort of a bit of a reprobate, Stanley Gifford, and he knew my grandfather, his name was Alliston, and he got invited along there because they used to sing in the pubs and do concerts and things that like together, and that was how they met. Now, the Allistons had been in Bewers for several generations, and Ruby's great-grandfather was a poor man, and he used to work in the tan yard, and she told us stories that that he couldn't afford to buy proper meat, so when the hides came in, they used to scrape the inside of the hides, and they used to take that meat home, and they used to stew it up for his family of 12. And there was a bit of meat left round the lips and that like. And the eldest of the family, his name was Charlie as well, and he was a horseman. And he got a job up in London working for Iron Coops in charge of a little yard of 24 horses. And he went up there, and he did quite well. And his girlfriend followed him up, and her name was Martha Bonney, and she came from Long Melford, Rodbridge Corner, where Ruby said there was a turnpike. There used to be a turnpike about there apparently when she was a young girl, but there's no sign of it now. And they called her father Old Three Balls a Penny, because he used to go round selling whitening balls. Everyone had a little perk then. They had to earn a few pence where they could. And he used to make up these whitening balls because he used to whitewash the walls, and that was his perk. And she followed Charlie Alliston up to Ruby's grandfather up to London, and she got a job as a cook up there, went into service, and I think she got £12 a year. And her perks was she was allowed to drain off the dripping and sell that, because people lived on bread and dripping that time of day. And Charlie's perks were that he used to save the vet coming out with the horses because he knew how to give them drenches and things. He knew about that, and he used to give them the few bob. And then he got a job in a bar, and then he had his own bar, and then the landlady of that bar put up enough money for him to take the Cooper's Arms, Union Street Borough, which is right in the heart of London. Cooper's Arms that's in Suffolk, and there he is in the front out there, and I think it was a very rough pub, and he had to look after himself there. I know he used to sleep with a sword under the bed, and he came out of there after 20 years, and he'd gone up there with nothing, and he came out of there with 20 years, this was in the 1880s, with £20,000, and that was a fortune then, particularly when you think that you could go in there for a penny, you could get 5 things. You could get a tot of rum, you could get a look at the sporting life, a pinch of snuff, a pinch of tobacco, and something else, and I can't remember what that was. But they said in the family that he made his money because the excise man used to come around Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday and Saturday, but he didn't come round on a Sunday, and they reckon he used to brew up his own beer and supplement the beer with that. But anyhow, he came out of there with £20,000, and he reckoned he was going to buy Rose Cottage Bewers that was up for auction, and he went to the auction and he bought Rose Cottage, all right, but that was Rose Cottage, Boxford. But anyhow, his son Charlie had been brought up with a silver spoon in his mouth because they sent him back to Bewers to be educated, and they got him into Sudbury Grammar School, and he used to ride his pony. I think it's 8 miles from Sudbury to Bewers, and he used to ride his pony every day from Bewers into Sudbury and leave it at the Christopher, and then he'd go to school and ride it back at night time. And then they spoke to someone, there's someone in the pub was going to get him a job at Hatton Garden, and they got him his diamond apron, all that sort of thing, and all the tools, and he went in one day and said he didn't like that, and they said, oh, well, don't worry, you don't have to go again, and he never went again, and he didn't do anything till he was 23, he was a man of leisure. Then they set him up in the hay and straw business, and then in 1905, the old man bought Red House Farm, Boxford as it was then, and that was for £12 an acre, and he was going to breed horses there. And then after that, he bought for Ruby's father Sampson's Hall, Kersey, up the road, and they moved up there. And Ruby said that they were in there 2 years, and they had bad years. The first year, they grew a load of peas, and that was very dry, and these peas didn't come to much, and they had to go and get all the women round about in carts and things to come up there. And the old man, Ruby's father, goes up there, and he sees Darky Spooner, who was the foreman, and he said to him, why, those old girls have got big backsides, Darky, what's going on up here? And they found out that these old girls were putting more peas down their Winceyette bloomers than they were in the sack. So Darky had to sort of sort that out as best as he could. I don't know how he worked that. But anyhow, the next year, that was a wet year, and they grew potatoes. And then, because it's not like it is now, you grow potatoes, there's cold storage, you can keep them all year round. But then, they used to put them in clamps along the side of the road. Used to dig the clamps out and put straw in, and then they used to put straw over the top, sort of thatch them, and then mud over the top. You can probably remember them where they used to put mangles and things in like that. Well, they did that with potatoes. Well, that was a wet year, and these clamps collapsed, and the potatoes got rotted and everything, and he'd had just about enough of this farm up there, and that was a poor old place. And on top of that, they suddenly lost 2 horses. These horses died, and what had happened was that orchids in the garden had grown out and into the hayfield, and they'd fed this hay with the orchids in, which was poisonous to horses, and that had killed 2 of their best horses, and he had enough of it. And there was a man going round called Jackson who came from Kersey Priory, and he wanted to buy a farm for his son-in-law, and so they sold it to him. And Ruby told us how they all moved together one day. They up the road about 2 miles, they went back to Red House Farm, and the cattle went in front, and the pigs, and they drove them all along the road, then the horses, then the carts with the furniture and everything like that. And last of all, she walked behind. She said, and that was a blistering hot day going up there. But once back at Red House Farm, Emily took up her mantle as head of the household. And that time of day, there was be in charge of the household and everything. She would pay the men. She would receive the milk when it came up and make the butter. She would, or even cheese. If there was a pig killed, that had to be salted, or the hams would be cured. And when I was a little boy over the kitchen, I can remember at least a dozen hams hanging, and sides of bacon, and the chaps of bacon with a tooth on it still. They carved the fatty bacon off there, and that was beautiful. And in fact, I still cure the hams myself to her old recipe. But anyhow, the other day we came across Emily's old recipe book, and that's amazing what it was in there, all the recipes and cures and charms and things like that, and Andrew will tell you about it.
Now you can cook anything if you look in Granny's old recipe book. I tell no lie, there's rabbit pie, sparrow and even rook. Pea soups a thick ladle stand, sheep's head broth, not a thing is canned. Nothing's ever store-bought here, everything's made with Granny's love and care. Suffolk cheese, that's mighty hard, and ferret sop with hum-treat pork lard. Chicken's feet make gravy good, with giblets for your boiled batter pud. So if you want to act right smart, well, just you look here from the start, 'cause from cow's heel jelly to stuffed sheep's hearts, in Granny's old recipe book. Yeah, boy, Granny's old recipe book. Now you can cure anything for sure with Granny's old recipe book. If she had a cough and feeling rough, a swig of this is what she took. Epicacuana wine, she say, and licorice and chlorodyne twice a day. Opadeldoxy's a bad back off, feed boiled mouse for the whoop and cough. House leek plant will rid of push, and celandine flower yellow jaundice. But with bay rum and castor oil, she could make hair grow on a billiard ball. For a tussock, alum is what you need, cobweb staunch a heavy bleed. You can do almost any good deed with Granny's old recipe book. Yeah, boy, Granny's old recipe book. Now there ain't no harm to take a charm from Granny's old recipe book. Don't be scared, there's hundreds there, and they really work. How many warts have you got, she'd say, then you'd find 'em disappear next day. Or she'd buy your carbuncles for a penny and say, wet your chilblains in the jerry. But if you want an obedient dog, carry a little bit of horse's frog, or get you melt neath a new foal's tongue, dry and put sweet oils thereon. Then you'll find that every day your old horse will you obey. There's loads of charms if you look, she say, in Granny's old recipe book. Yeah, boy, Granny's old recipe book. Now when Granny died, we all cried, 'cause in her old recipe book, she had writ, now don't get frit, 'cause here's what to do if you look. If you lay me down in that box so strong, by the old church wall, boy, you won't be wrong. Place a stone at my hidden feet, to say, old Granny, here do sleep. Play that old hymn, just like I told you to. Then axe folks back for a drop of brew. Say, old Granny, warn't too bad as you celebrate the wonderful life I had, and make sure the old ways don't get brook, but just you keep on having a look at the cures and charms and things to cook in Granny's old recipe book. Yeah, boy, Granny's old recipe book. Thank you, Mother, for the rabbit. Pork cheese in the larder if you want one. See you at church on Sunday.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, as that was a time when you had to prepare all the food at home, there was nothing prepared like there is going to Sainsbury's and supermarkets now. Entertainment was the same. There was no television and radio, and people made their own entertainment. They would, the farmers would invite other farmers round, and they'd play cards. There'd be all sorts of things going on down the pub, quoits and shove halfpenny and things like that. And people would, take a wager on for anything, anywhere, almost any time, and things like that. And the old man had a friend called Stanley Gifford, who I told you about, and they were great mates, and they'd lost their money, the Giffords, at this mill at Stratford St Mary, and he had a little cottage on the River Stour at Henny, where he used to trap otters. Otters were plentiful then. They were a pest, in fact. I suppose they're a bit like the squirrels now. And he used to trap them and used to send them to London, and he used to train greyhounds, and the old man would give him a horse to break, and he'd break this horse ready for the cart, and then he'd give him another one, and things like that, and that's how he learned a living. And he also did poaching up and down the river on the river bank and that sort of thing, and he got caught a number of times. And this particular day, the old man went to collect him out of jail where he'd been for poaching, and he got him out and took him to have a meal in one of the places in Sudbury. And there was a fellow in there talking about what a wonderful swimmer he was and how he'd take anyone on, and Stanley was sitting there and listening. He couldn't put up with this anymore. He said, "I'll take you on." And this fellow said, "Where and when?" He said, Henny Swan to Ballingdon Bridge, Sudbury, to Henny Swan, fully clothed, middle of winter. He said, for 5 sovereigns. So Stanley hadn't got any money, so the old man put the money up for him. And when the day came round, on Boxing Day, they all met down there, and Stanley just took off his jacket off and had his normal clothes on. This fellow was all in light clothes and everything like that. And it was quite an event. There was a lot of people, half of Sudbury turned out for it. And he just jumped in. But needless to say, Stanley was drying himself out by the fire in Henny Swan while this old fellow was still in the water. And the old man went and collected his money. And he said to Stanley, "I've got some dry clothes here for you, boy." He said, "Do you want to put them on?" And Stanley stood in front of this fire. He said, "No, I'm all right, Charles." He said, "I'll be dry here in a minute. Don't worry about that." He said, "Well, I bought some steak here for you." He said, "I'll get the landlady to cook it." He said, "Oh, don't worry about that." And he ate that raw as well as he stood there. Well, nowadays you can go and get raw meat like that as a bit of a delicacy. But that was what it was like. And a lot of these young reprobates would meet particularly at the Nail and Anchor, and they would ride from there to somewhere else. And the best people with the best point-to-point horses were the Borehams. And one of these Borehams had his best point-to-point horse that day, but he was late coming into the yard. And Ruby said that he tried to jump a great holly hedge with this horse, but that landed on top of it, and it never was any more good after that. And he ruined his horse up there just for a little bit. And he'd also, this Stanley Gifford, had raced cars, just started getting about then, and a man called Fred Kingsbury in Sudbury had bought an automobile, one of these newfangled things, and Stanley Gifford had already raced it and been beaten. I keep forgetting to move the pictures on. Stanley Gifford had already been beaten by this car, and they weren't going to be beaten by a blinking newfangled thing like that. But the old man had a print at home of a trotting pony, and trotting ponies were a prized possession. And this little trotting pony had beaten all sorts of things, and he goes to Lavenham Horse Fair to buy a heavy horse. And Lavenham Horse Fair finished with the 1418 war, and this is before the 1418 war. And he goes to Lavenham Horse Fair to buy a heavy horse, and he's in the pub there, and something goes whoosh past the door, and I go out and have a look, see what it is, and it's this little trotting pony, and there's a fellow driving it up there, quite fierce, and the old man thinks, "Crikes, I could do with that." And so he hangs about there and offers this fellow money for it. No, he wasn't going to sell it, and he doubles up. And in the end, he buys this horse, and he takes it home, and he sends to Sulky's in London to have a trotting dilly made, a special lightweight cart made for it. And he's waiting for this fellow Fred Kingsbury in the right occasion, and when that occurs, it helps to pay for his outfit. But Andrew will tell you about it.
As I sat in an ale tavern one day at the Hoss Fair, there came a sight of glad sad eyes down the thoroughfare. Peering through a window pane, a soapbox kind of cart, I saw drawn by a tiny horse that moved it like a dart. And the hard old man who drove that horse didn't seem too kind. How I thought I'd treat her different if only she were mine. 'Cause her feet you couldn't see 'em move, so quick I do declare. 11-2, but could she go? Roxanne the trotting mare. I'd gone to buy a heavy horse, we needed one to plough, and scraped up all the money all our income would allow. But when I saw this tiny horse, how down the road she flew, I thought, my little booty, how I could do with you. And when I went back home that night, I hoped I hadn't done wrong, 'cause I'd bought a little trotting mare and a plough horse I had none. 'Cause her feet you couldn't see 'em move, so quick I do declare. 11-2, but could she go? Roxanne the trotting mare. In the village lived a wealthy man, name of Kingsbury. He had bought an automobile, fast as fast could be. It was the only one around and had beaten sure enough all the horseback challengers who tried to call his bluff. But with a little sulky cart, wheels a 5-foot span, and this little horse I thought, I'll beat that boastful man. 'Cause her feet you couldn't see 'em move, so quick I do declare. Roxanne the trotting mare. In a market bar one afternoon, Fred Kingsbury did say he'd beat any horse around and a wager big he'd lay. 'Cause he'd heard about me trotting mare, and when I took his bait, I wouldn't know how to pay him if we should come in late. But when I drew in front that day, no more I was afraid, and as I drove into our yard, for me trotting mare I'd paid. 'Cause her feet you couldn't see 'em move, so quick I do declare. 11-2, but could she go? Roxanne the trotting mare. Now I've travelled many counties show, market and horse fair, and I wouldn't swap or trade for any rig I have seen there. My trotting mare beyond compare, not even 12 hands high, as pretty as a picture, and you should see her fly. And now that she is getting old, I'll not drive her in the cart, but turn her in the meadow where from me she'll never part. 'Cause her feet you couldn't see 'em move, so quick I do declare. 11-2, but could she go? Roxanne the trotting mare.
Well, they sell Ruby's donkey and they buy for her a pony. And Lazzy Pattle, one of these travelling people and horse dealers, is then working up there on the farm. And he says, I'll come up and teach you to ride on Good Friday, my little Roo. And he called her my little Roo because he took a shine to Ruby. What had happened was that he'd already lost his wife, and he took his little girl down to Hadley to buy her a new dress. And they bought her this new red dress, and they had over-mantel mirrors that time of day and over the fireplace, and this little girl was dancing about in this dress, and the flames come out there, and they got hold of her dress, and Ruby said she remembers it quite well because she used to have a clean nightdress on every Saturday, and they sent up, had she got a clean nightdress for this little girl to go to hospital in, and she went to hospital, and she never came home, poor little dear. And so he took a shine to Ruby, and he came up there and taught her to ride. And the old man said, well, if you can ride, you can come hunting with me. And so he takes her out hunting, and he said, there's a little jump there. He said, you best go over there. He said, sit well forward. And she sat forward, and over she goes, over the ears. And he said, no, there's another one here. And he said, now sit back. And she sits back and comes off the backside. And then he says, anyhow, she came off 3 times and before she managed to sit on. And he said, well, you can ride now. He said, so we shan't be taking you down to your school anymore. You can ride your pony down there. I'll have a word with Billy Emney. And Billy Emney was what they called a job master. And a job master was a man where you could go to and get a horse out for any purpose. You could hire, if you'd gone to Hadley on the train, you could go there and hire a pony and trap to go out somewhere or something like that, or if you want a day's hunting. And she went down there and left her pony with Billy Emney. And when she was going down there, she used to meet up with her friends going down. There was the Kembles then were in the village, and there was Kersey, there was the Gages, and there was the Jacksons and the Arthurs and people like that, several other friends down there. And she was at this Miss Byers' school, and about this time she had a story that she told us that I think she was about 12 then, and it was coming up to Christmas time, and they sold a whole load of turkeys that got to be delivered into Ipswich on this particular day. And I think that they were thrashing as well, and they said the only man that had got spare was Charlie Cope. And Charlie Cope was actually convalescing from the 1418 war. If they'd been injured in the 1418 war, when they came back, they put them on the farms to work. And he had a little corner shop at Walthamstow, and the old man used to let him have a day off, and he'd go up to Walthamstow and he'd bring him back some sugar and things like that. And they said, so he says, the old man says, well, he said, we've only got Charlie Cope, but he doesn't know anything about Ipswich. Ruby knows, she'll have to go. And the snow was coming down, she said, and that was thick and fast. And her mother said, you can't send that girl. And all they had was what Ruby called was an open van, which was just a flat cart with a seat across the front. And they got a blue roan mare called Derby and put her in this cart. And she was sliding about all over the place. So they went up the road to the blacksmiths, and they had spikes put in, and the snow kept coming down, Ruby said, and away they went down into Hadley, up Lady Lane, past the monument of Roland Taylor there, and they got into Ipswich. And they found this place, and they took the turkeys along there. And the butcher, when they got there, and he saw he was dealing with a 12-year-old girl, he started poo-pooing these turkeys and said they weren't so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. But Ruby learnt then to stand by what she had been told, and she said, no, that's the price, that's got to be the price. And so he took them, and they got the money. And they started out for home, and the snow kept coming down, she said. And they got as far as Hintlesham George, and Charlie Cope said, I'm going to go in here and have a drink, warm myself up. He said, I'll bring you out something. And he brought her out a glass of ginger wine. And he said, I've just bought a packet of 5 Woodbines. He said, would you like one? And, and she was 12, and she said that was the first cigarette that she'd ever had. And they went on to Hadley. And when they got onto the top of the hill, I don't know if you know that road from Ipswich into Hadley, you get there at the top of the hill where Dr. Taylor's monument is, and she said this mare, she said the spikes are gone then off her hooves, and she started to slide, and she sat back in her breechings. The breechings is the strap that comes around the back, and she sat back on her hocks, and she skidded all the way down that hill. She said it must be nearly a mile from down there, and they hit this side, one thing another, but when they got right down the bottom in Hadley Street, she stopped, picked herself up, and where they went home, and she went in when she got home and went to see her father, but he was in bed asleep, and she put the money by his bedside, and that was that. But anyhow, when harvest time comes, they said, oh, you've got help in the harvest field, and she was a good girl. And in fact, someone from the Women's Land Army had seen her working, and they'd given her a badge, and she was very proud of that badge that she joined. I think she was only about 12 and wasn't really old enough to be in it, but they said she could be a member of the Women's Land Army, and she was very proud about that. And about this time, Stanley Gifford had a litter of puppies, greyhound puppies, and he sold them all, and the cad of the litter he gave to Ruby. And he said, you train them up, because there was a coursing club round then. There was lots of coursing clubs around here and round about at Stowmarket. The Thurlows had the best dogs, Ruby said. And at Hitcham, Mr. Squirrel had a dog called Blue Ball that was one of the best dogs. And I think that coursing has got a bad name now and perhaps is politically incorrect, but I think in those days people had a greater respect from nature. They took from nature, but they had more respect for it. And certainly the old man would stop his car, and if he saw a covey of partridges, he'd count them and see how many there were, and 16, 17, 18, and that would be a topic of conversation. And they had more respect for nature then. But anyhow, so I'm saying that in defence of the coursing that they did, and this story I'm going to tell you. So he said, are you getting that little dog fit? And she called it Rear Admiral after her initials, and he said, there's a meet of the Sudbury District Coursing Club at Edwardstone. Make sure you bring your dog down there. And so she got her old dog. They went with her father, and she went to Edwardstone, and she walked all along. And when they got, I can't remember where it was, they walked for miles, and they said, well, it's your dog's turn now. And she had him on a piece of chain and binder string, and they all laughed when her dog came out, because these others all had proper leather collars and coats and things like that. But anyhow, the little old dog won. He won this meet and won the coursing stake. And afterwards there was a dinner at the Swan at Boxford, and they made her wait outside. And they went and then had the dinner, and she said you could hear him talking and singing and going on. Then they had the presentation, and they called her in, and she got, I think it was 21 shillings, a sovereign, gave her 21 shillings, and she said she went down to Mrs. Muntz's shop on the corner, and she bought him a pen'orth of jubes, because that's what the old dog likes. And I don't know what some of you probably don't remember what jubes were, but that's what they call these sweets that time of day. And then she had to walk the 2 miles home up the hill to home to Red House Farm, which is on the way to Kersey. But then it's harvest time, and they said, you've got to help out in the harvest field, Ruby. We want you to lead the horse in between the shocks of corn when the men are pitching. And you mustn't start until they're finished pitching, and you shout out, hold ye, and then you move to the next lot of shocks. Well, when these horses put their foot down, they stand 4 square, and you've either got to move and go forward, or you've got to wait till they're finished. And if they put their foot on yours, you've had it, because you can't get them to move a single hoof. And Andrews will just tell you a bit about it.
I took my derby down the fields where the bulrushes grow, where the gaffer skates in winter amidst the ice and snow. We were carting corn from shock to shock, pitching as we go, when he set his grut hoof on my foot and crushed my poor old toe. So giddy up, old Derby, giddy up now, hold it short. If you can't move this old wagon, then I does he think you ought. You had your hoods and bran now in the nose bag that I brought. So giddy up, old Derby, get up now, hold it short. To harvest nuts is easy, hazels on hedges grow, and blackberries and filberts we'll gather as we go. But nothing seems so very hard when a heavy horse stands still, to move his grut hoof off your foot that make you feel right ill. So giddy up, old Derby, giddy up now, hold it short. If you can't move this old wagon, then I does he think you ought. You had your hoods and bran now in the nose bag that I brought. So giddy up, old Derby, get up now, hold it short. Mr. Watson is the blacksmith that I took you to. He gave me 2 apples, 1 each for me and you, and 4 new heavy shoes now, held by nails like a dart. I can feel them pressing through my boot, blush boy how they smart. So giddy up, old Derby, giddy up now, hold it short. If you can't move this old wagon, then I does he think you ought. You had your hoods and bran now in the nose bag that I brought. So giddy up, old Derby, get up now, hold it short. Well, now the men are loading, the wagon it must stay, If one fell down and cracked his skull, there would be hell to pay. So hurry up, you pitchers, so we can move along. That is if my poor foot's still here, that feel as though that's gone. So giddy up, old Derby, giddy up now, Hordy short. If you can't move this old wagon, then I does he think you ought. You had your roots and bran now in the nosebag that I brought. So giddy up, old Derby, get up now, Hordy short. Well, Billy, he's a missin', that's milkin' that is gone, and double up still moanin' 'bout the Scotchman in the corn. He's got an eyevil in his navel, that's what he cussed and swore. Whatever pain they think they got, my foot's a damn sight more. So giddy up, old Derby, giddy up now, Hordy short. If you can't move this old wagon, then I does he think you ought. You had your roots and bran now in the nosebag that I brought. So giddy up, old Derby, get up now, Hordy short. Well, now we've finished loading, the wagon ropes are on. The green bough's been laid on the top, 'cause this is our last one. They'll be celebrating all around in the stackyard when we come. Then us humbrew with the gaffer before I limp off home. So giddy up, old Derby, giddy up now, Hordy short. If you can't move this old wagon, then I does he think you ought. You had your roots and bran now in the nosebag that I brought. So giddy up, old Derby, get up now, Hordy short.
Well, at the end of the 1418 war, they hold celebrations down at Boxford Rectory Gardens, and Ruby's mother comes down to play the piano, and Ruby's learnt dancing, and she's going to do some dancing. And it's down there that she meets a young man that she takes a shine to, and but she's going to school at Sudbury at the time, and he's at Boxford. And then she meets him again when they go to be confirmed at Edwardstone. And but her mother wasn't very keen on him because, well, her father particularly, because he was the publican's son from the White Hart in Boxford, and he was shortly after this to make a name for himself when he left Boxford on the Kersey at Southend as Tornado Smith, the Wall of Death rider, who rode with a lion on his motorbike, and that was the love of her life. Anyhow, the times aren't very good, and that's him on the end there, Tornado, and as Tickles as Ruby's youngest brother, and he used to write her letters and send her poetry and things like that. And he's the Boxford hero is Tornado. Anyhow, the times are not good. Ruby's father takes to his bed. He gives his orders out the window. The foreman then, out the bedroom window, she had to relay the orders to the foreman. The foreman then is a fellow called Harry Tricker, and Harry Tricker had a bit of a wry sense of humour. And one day he said, "Tell Harry to get 5 men for thrashing." He said, and so Harry goes round. That time of day, you could go and pick people up there just waiting there for a job anywhere. And he came back and he said, "I've got 19 men, Governor." 19 men, Harry, what on earth are you thinking about getting 19 men? He said, "Who have you got then?" He said, "I got Double Up Griggs, I got Q Hughes." He said, "I got so-and-so." He said, "That's 3. He said, "Then I got 7 gun, that's 10. He said, "And I got 9 again, that's 19. that was his idea of a joke. One day he said, "Oh, Mrs. Clark, she had 22 children twice, you know." Say, "What, 44 children, Harry?" "Well, no, he said she had 22, then she had another one, that made 23, and that died, so she had 22 again." But anyhow, he was a bit of a card, and Ruby wants to buy another horse, and Stanley Gifford's got a horse called Honour Bright that she wants to buy, and that's £13.10. And she opens a money box and she's only got £10. But the old man said, well, you've been a good girl, you've been helped, and I haven't given you anything for it. So he gives her another £3.10. And she duly buys this horse on a bright, and she's going to gymkhanas and showing this horse, and she's getting on well. And a man called Canham, who was a job master in Ipswich, she's riding for him. He was a horse dealer, and also a man at Weatherden Maypole, who kept Weatherden Maypole by the name of Partridge, and he was a horse dealer. And she had loads of stories all about how she used to get to these shows and things that she would tell us as children, and when she was out hunting and all things like that. And wherever we went, she always had a story. If we went through Cavendish, she would tell us a story about the pond there. When they first put electricity in, the poles came down into that pond, and that night a horseman went in there with his horse to get some water, and that killed them both. When we went through Brent Ely, she said, see that house up there at the start of the 39 war? There was a German spy taken out of a house up there. I don't know, she knew about that. When we went past People's Park in Sudbury, she told us a story about how they'd shown a lovely Shire mare down there and foal. And it was a particularly hot day, and it was so hot, and there was no shade down there at all for them to get anywhere, and that virtually killed this mare. And when they got her home, they managed to get her home into a float, and they got her on the field, and she never got up anymore, and that killed her. And going into Sudbury, there's some cottages on the old road going into Sudbury from Newton Green. There's some cottages on the left, and behind that was a big pit. And in the 1418 war, a plane came down in there, and she mentioned some lady who lived in these cottages. She came out and she found this fellow's head in the road, and she picked it up in her apron, and she said she never was any more good after that woman. I think that affected her. But anyhow, she had stories like that, and if we went out at night time, she knew every star in the sky, because whenever they went to a hunting meet, they hacked everywhere, or they walked. And they would walk the 2 miles every Saturday night down to a dance in Boxford. And dancing became very popular. Ballroom dancing came in very much in the 20s and was very, very popular. And they did the old-time dances on a Monday night, I think, to records, and they had a local band on a Saturday. And this song that Andrew's going to sing for you is about revisiting those times. Thank you.
I went down to the place where the old folks all go, to an old-time dance like we did long ago. As I whirled me wife round, my head it did spin, and I thought of the time when her heart I did win. I thought of the time and the friends I knew then, and I found I was back in them times once again. Through all of the pleasure and none of the faults, as we whisked round the room in the old-fashioned waltz. Well, I found I was out in the fields once more, with a ransomed YL long furrows to draw, where the coulters are set and the breasts all agleam. I was ploughing again with me old 3-horse team. Of the straightest of furrows you'd see in a day, and the seagulls they followed us all of the way. When the sun had gone down and the dagget unfolds, I was still there a-ploughing in the old-fashioned walls. Well, I thought I was out with the old thrashing team, with a big Marshall drum and a Garrett engine, where the beaters they beat and the concave went whum. I'd be out there a-thrashing until kingdom come. I was bagging up wheat in an 18-stone sack, and the chaff it was blowing all the way down me back. I was itching and scratching for all I was worth, but I was still there a-thrashing in the old-fashioned waltz. Well, I seemed to be sitting on a cast iron seat with a canvas strap around one of me feet. I was pushing it down to put sheaves in their rows, to be stood up next morn afore breakfast we goes. One eye on the platform and one on the twine. If a rabbit that run, that was gonna be mine. The twine it was tying without any halts on a McCormick self-binder in the old-fashioned walls. In the winter I a hedging and ditching and found where there's a nip in the air, mud and slaughter the ground. With a spade and a scuppet and a flasher so sharp, and an old horse called Dragon in his tumbrel cart. Then the music had stopped and them times I did leave. I was back into day and me heart it did grieve. But when the band strikes up and me partner I hold, I'll be back there again in the old-fashioned waltz.
Thank you very much indeed. Now's the time that you're waiting for, the interval. So we'll have about 10 minutes and you can refresh your glasses if you like, and then we'll carry on with some more, if we may. Thank you.